His original impetus, and one of the striking thing about the British New Wave writers is that none of them went to college.
Oh, no, that is interesting.
Chris Priest did not go to college. M. John Harris, are you fucking kidding, going to college? They were working in a shop at 16.
Yeah, right.
And I found this out when I read England Swings SF. I mean, anyone was free to find this out in the States, because Judy Merrill, this an anthology of introducing a new wave to the Yanks, reprinted, at least one or two stories by all of them, and invited them to make comments. And every one of them, in commenting, talked about how much they hated what we would call high school. Well, it was high school. None of them went to private schools. They talked about how much they hated high school and couldn't wait to get out of it, although it meant working in a chip shop. And you realize none of these writers went to college. The last time that a generation of SF writers in America didn't go to college was the Futurians, who all graduated from high school in time for there were one or two exceptions, but really one or two.
Didn't Ballard go to college?
Blish. Well, Ballard was born in it probably did, since he was a physician.
Right.
Yeah,
Ballard
was born in 1930.
Yeah.
He was, these were talking about people born in
but
45, 47.
Yeah.
The Futurians, except for one or two who had middle-class backgrounds, all graduated from high school in time for the Depression. They all educated themselves.
Right.
Asimov, for example.
But in fact, the jape that this is a revolt of the English majors, you're talking...
In America,
You're talking about Zelazny, Delaney, Dish, not all of whom finished college.
Lafferty was part of the New Wave, really.
All right. I was just...
The American New Wave.
Yeah,
I didn't want to get into a discussion of the New Wave. I'm more interested in what you think of, Gardner's position there, whether,
Tell us, well, do you know where he was instead of in college? This is interesting.
He went into the Army at 18 and become in those days, if you went in for the 3-year choice as a volunteer, you could choose a school, and usually you got it. And he got public relations, which meant things like putting out the base newspaper, writing newspaper articles, and in fact, his wife has said that he learned his trade as an editor there, and I think there's some truth in that.
He certainly did, because he sold his first story before going into the Army.
Yeah, he did.
And boy, is it bad! It's in a 1967 issue of If magazine, which I found
first.
Back
Well, it was bought as an If first.
As an If first, it might have been an If last, from what you would think. It was 3 years for another story.
The Army really wanted to keep him on.
Oh,
as
really?
an editor in Stars and Stripes. They were very anxious to re-up him, and they were making some very good offers. He could have had a good career in the Army. But I think the big thing, and he considered it even, the big thing that tipped it was his realizing that if he did so, that he'd be writing this kind of prose that they wanted.
Right.
And I saw one of the articles he wrote toward the end, and it's like a parody of Army prose. He's describing this exercise the soldiers had gone on, and it's full of soldiers uncoiling their lean flanks in the mist-covered morning.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I never saw Army prose like that. Wow.
That was why that won an award, and they really wanted to keep him because he could write exciting Army prose with that kind of stuff. Unfortunately for them, he was Gardner Dozois, and he was also doing things like they had him. They needed a set of re-upping ads for the paper, to encourage people. So he got this trackage sergeant you could find, this big, serious black guy, and he got a photograph of him holding. He started with himself. He got a photograph of himself holding a blanket up to the side of his head and sucking on his thumb and looking really worried, and said, "Fine security in today's Army." And they went, and he had a second one made up in the series. He's got this big Strack sergeant, and they got him standing up on top of a step ladder. They did a little elaborate photo shoot, and with him like marching forward and smiling, but about to take a step off of the ladder, and turning, smiling to the camera, and saying, "Take a step into the future." And it almost got published, but it went up to headquarters, and somebody said, "Say, is this guy funning us?"
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Don, do you have anything to add to that question?
Well, I thought, generally speaking, that, you know, as far as education, I think that one can become an extremely literate English major type without going to college, certainly. I went to college, but I did not finish college, and, you know, I think that, you know, my training was just in reading everything I get my hands on, sort of thing. As far as the New Wave thing, I always... It's certainly, as I said before, Gardner's stories suited my sensibility, and I was reading as much of the New World type stuff as I could get my hands on, and also the more American stuff like Dish and Delaney and that sort of thing. So yeah, I felt, you know, certainly Gardner's stories were not very popular with the more old wave types in the 70s, and you know. So I thought it was very much part of, you know, generally speaking, what you would call the new wave sensibility.
I think Gardner stuff is actually in a smaller group. There's this group that included Gardner and Joe Haldeman and Ed Bryant and
Effinger.
And yes, George Alec Effinger and George R.R. Martin.
Right.
And as David Hartwell once said, they were all basically writing for each other's approval.
Yes.
And that was one of the things that kept them going. Was they were, you know, not all of them were getting the popular acclaim, but Gardner Dozois liked your story. That meant a lot. You know, Joe Haldeman and George Martin agreed that your story was great. That was your reward. And
everybody knew each other and talked about their stories.
But they're all writers who are strong storytellers, too.
And in an interview recently, George Martin said that really, that when he was young, they thought Gardner Dozois was the future of science fiction. He was their Kwisatz Haderach, and he's
Johnny Michel.
And you know, he was their John Galt. And
who is Gardner Dozois?
And he pretty much as good as said the fact that Gardner Dozois is not today recognized as the great writer of his time is the great failure of science fiction.
Wow.
So
I hope